This is Frankie Lynch, Saturn Girl. Please, please, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Comment below. Also, it really helps out with the algorithm, and I need all the help I can get. Ask not what Frankie can do for you, but what you can do for Frankie. That was a really bad JFK impression. But anyway, we're talking about Mars entering Leo. This happens tomorrow, May 20th. And Mars will stay in Leo until about July 11th. So we're going to talk a little bit about the symbolism of Mars in Leo. Then we're going to go through some past events and historic occurrences associated with this transit. And then we're going to talk about what it means for you and look at your horoscopes for Mars entering Leo for each of the rising signs. So let's get right into it. First of all, what's Mars? Well, he's our aggression. He's our drive, our masculinity. He represents how we get what we want oftentimes. He's also competition, leadership. We'll see injuries and illnesses associated with Mars. He originally ruled illnesses. We'll also see violence, right? We always think of Mars as violence. According to 2nd century astrologer Vedius Valens, Mars also rules abortion, which is quite interesting given all the political developments going on right now. Mars also rules love affairs, also patronizing prostitution, right? The world's oldest profession, Mars. And also theft and thieves, right? Mars is masculinity. Well, how about Leo? Leo is the house of the sun, which is quite interesting because you'll notice that Leo gets a lot of its significations from its rulership by the sun. For example, authority, right? Authority is a very solar sort of signification. We often think of Leo as self-centered and selfish, right? And the sun is the center of its system. Everything revolves around the sun. So it's quite fitting then it's associated with Leo. But Leo's a lot more complicated than just all that. Anyway, Leo is also associated with leadership like Mars is. Assertiveness, control, right? Because Mars is fixed. So it gets known for being stubborn. So Mars is also, not Mars, Leo. Leo is also associated with control, as we said, and pursuing goals. Leo is a hot and dry sign, right? And Mars is a hot and dry planet. So we often see things like heat waves, wildfires. But more interesting, what dryness means in astrology is more independence, being self-directed. So people who are pursuing goals and being quite independent or enterprising. You'll also see governance and governing. What about Mars in Leo? What do we see when Mars enters the house of the sun? Well, some words and phrases I thought of were triumph, victories, military honors or displays, taking charge or giving commands. Again, leadership and governance, asserting one's own agenda, rivalries, competitions, winning. I'm winning. I'm by winning. I'm sorry. I can't help it. I've got Adonis DNA. So, Charlie Sheen. Demagoguery, right? I can think of one big demagogue with Mars and Leo. My way or the highway mentality, imposing your beliefs on other people, assuming you know what's best for people, inserting yourself into situations that you have no business being involved in, being possessive or acquisitive, right? Just thinking of a very constructive expression of this placement, I'd imagine the relentless or unyielding leader, right? Who is unwavering or never gives up on behalf of their people. Who are some Mars and Leo celebrities we can talk about here quick? It often gives us a sense of the quality, right, of the placement. So number one, Donald J. Trump. I mean, is that surprising? You know, that's someone who's really concerned with winning, giving commands, right? Definitely demagoguery. You know, it's his way or the highway, of course. And he tries to impose his stuff on us. Well, who else? Hillary Clinton. That doesn't surprise me either, right? You know, when you watch the way she talked about Libya and Gaddafi, but that's another thing. When you watch, just going back to the Clinton-Trump debates of 2016, you can see the Mars and Leo bouncing back and forth. But it is quite funny. Volodymyr Zelensky, right? The president of Ukraine, also Mars and Leo, right? And he's been a big fixture in world politics lately, right? Excuse me. Also Emmanuel Macron, the president of France. He's another my way or the highway type, right? He just raised the retirement age in France and drove his own people nuts. In fact, they were, you know, rioting in the street, major protests. If only we Americans could do that. Serena Williams, the famous tennis player, Mars and Leo, right? And another person who's just very adept in competition, Beyonce. I'm sorry, but if your name is one word or one name, rather than, you know, people, yeah, she's Beyonce Knowles, but no one calls her that. It's just Beyonce. Very Leonian, right? Kamala Harris can't see her own fault. And Frank Sinatra, the famous crooner, right? New York. And he was sort of infamous for trying to use his mob friends to hurt people he didn't like. So we're going to look at a couple key times here throughout the 20th century and the 21st century for a sense of what Mars and Leo transits are like. So number one, we're talking about September to November 1964. We're talking about September to October 1981, October to May 1995, August 2nd to September of 2000, May to July of 2008, August to October of 2013, and July to August of 2019. So we're dividing these events up into four main categories. There's plenty more to go over, but we're going to divide it up basically into violence and illness. We'll talk about building and business ventures. There are very few of those, don't worry. We'll talk about entertainment news, and we'll talk about sports and competition. This may not surprise you, but the biggest category of events here is sports and competition. Well, let's start out with the violent stuff and get that out of the way because I don't like it. So violence, illness, and incarceration. Mars does rule incarceration. So the day that Mars went into Leo in 1964, the chancellor of UC Berkeley basically told the student body that they couldn't organize politically anymore. Basically, it was to get them not to protest against certain issues. But it ended up sparking the first student revolt of the 1960s. So this was a very momentous event. Basically, this chancellor was my way or the highway. He was trying to assert his control and tell them what they could and couldn't do, which, you know, didn't go over well with the student body. Imagine that. Another really interesting thing from 1964, which was the Warren Commission, right? That was the commission appointed to investigate the Kennedy assassination. They issued their dubious claims on the 27th of 27th of what? It doesn't really matter, but the 27th of September. 7th of September 1964, Their findings were that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone with a magic bullet. Somehow the bullet just magically went through, Governor Connolly and then turned back around. And, let's suffice it to say that I'm very, very passionate about the JFK assassination and that I studied it quite a bit. So we should do a whole nother thing on that. But I don't believe anything the Warren Commission said. Oh, 1995. Jeffrey Dahmer was clubbed to death by a fellow inmate in a Wisconsin prison. Now, you may remember Jeffrey Dahmer. He was the notorious serial unaliver. What can I say on here? Who was infamous for consuming his victims. He ingested his victims, right? I don't think I can say exactly what he did without getting in trouble, but you see what I'm saying. So anyway, I mean, that's a very violent thing, number one. And the fact that he got beaten to be unalived is also very fitting of Mars, isn't it? Also, Ted Kennedy was diagnosed with a brain tumor in May of 2008. We could say he was the last good Kennedy. I mean, he got a terrible reputation for the Chappaquiddick, Mary Jo Kopechne thing. But there's a lot of weirdness around that too. And there may be more to it than meets the eye. But again, that's another thing. Jeffrey Epstein was charged with sex trafficking July 8th of 2019. Very Martian thing. Remember illnesses? So there was an Ebola outbreak also in 2019 in the Democratic Republic of Congo. It got really bad. In fact, it got so bad that the World Health Organization issued a declaration that the Ebola outbreak was a public health emergency with international concerns. So that was a very dangerous situation. Oh, and speaking of incarceration, El Chapo in 2019 was finally recaptured after he broke out of prison and sentenced to life. So, Martian. We have a few building and business projects here too. I mean, it's just a couple, but I thought it was worth mentioning that the channel tunnel, between France and England had its first trains going through it. And this was 1995. So those of us 80s and 90s kids, we probably remember how big of a deal that really was when it was being constructed. And then, this is a big deal to me, but the ancient Iraqi city of Babylon was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2019. Babylon or Babylonia was where astrology came from for us. So very, very important to me. And plus, I'm obsessed with ancient Mesopotamia. What about entertainment news? Well, number one, Prince opens for the Rolling Stones at the LA Coliseum in 1981. What's interesting is while this was happening for him, Mars was passing through his 10th house, Leo, because he's a Scorpio rising, and Mars also rules his first house. So that was a very auspicious event. It makes perfect sense. That really kickstarted his career. Well, how about September of 2000? Eminem and my dear, lovely Aaliyah, who passed away. They won the MTV Music Video Awards, and I believe it was Best Performing Artist or Best New Artist or whatever it was. But you feel me. Now think about Eminem, I mean, he's got Mars and Libra, different thing, but and a lot of conflict. He's very adept at battling through words. Well, also in 2008, Ringo Starr's 10th All-Star Band, how clever, debuted June 19th of 2008. So, Ringo Starr. It just sounded like another Leo Mars type event. Everything revolves around Ringo Starr, doesn't it? Oh, Lorde. So Lorde released her debut album called Pure Heroine, September of 2013. Also when Mars was in Leo, obviously. Oh, this is interesting too. Forbes magazine declared Taylor Swift the highest paid entertainer at $185 million at the time. And that was 2019. Oh, they declared, yeah, anyway. So that's interesting entertainment news. Also, we have political and diplomatic developments. In 1964, Lyndon Baines Johnson won the presidency again, or rather won the presidential election, because after the Kennedy assassination, right, he became president. Barack Obama in 2008 won his nomination for president, June, which is quite interesting because he's a Leo sun, 7th house. So Mars was touring an angular house when he got the nomination. Again, quite interesting because angular houses, right? The 1st, 10th, 4th, 7th, and 4th are way more potent. President Xi Jinping of China announced the new Silk Road economic belt as part of his new Belt and Road Initiative. Very famous, very famous. Right? Excuse me. Basically taking charge of the region of Asia Minor, which is very important. It's a very important economic region, big oil producer, among other things. Angela Merkel and the Christian Democrats in Germany won their 3rd term. And they did it with really good results. So very Mars and Leo. Victory, right? Government shutdown. Government shutdown, October 1st, 2013. We're almost there again. What was the dispute about? Why did the government shut down? Well, it was a debt ceiling dispute, which couldn't be resolved at the time because of disagreements over spending cuts. I'm sure you can guess which side wanted to cut a bunch of spending for those of us who are, working people, single parents, all that sort of thing. So we're approaching it again, unfortunately, and over the same stupidness, except now it's even worse. Oh, another thing to mention is Putin, Vladimir Putin, who is a Scorpio rising, meaning that Mars goes through his 10th house when Mars is in Leo. He met with Pope Francis on July 4th of 2019. So they were discussing a lot of the fighting happening in eastern Ukraine at the time in the Donbass region because, there were pro-Russian separatists or whatever you want to call them fighting against the Ukrainian government. So, and around that time too, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church officially broke with the Russian Orthodox Church. Religious leaders around the world took big notice of this, especially the Pope. So the Pope wanted to address a lot of these things with Putin, including the war in Syria. There were splits. It's interesting because Mars rules splits and schisms. Well, that same day too, Donald Trump had his Salute America July 4th celebration, which ended up looking a little bit more like a North Korean military celebration. It was controversial because of the really heavy military presence, right? Military honors. Remember we talked about that with Mars and Leo? It's fantastic. Fantastic. These are fantastic people. We need the tanks. It's a show of America is a great country. It's a great, I don't know. It's a really bad Trump impression. But you see there were tanks, scattered about as part of the aesthetic, which again, it's very Mars and Leo. Reminds me of North Korea for some reason. Military honors, It was sort of like a military rally. Oh, and then Boris Johnson was elected Prime Minister in July of 2019, Prime Minister of England, of Britain, the UK, and he was replacing Theresa May, the renowned walking skeleton. Of course, we needed Humpty Dumpty, Boris Johnson, to replace her, both from the Conservative Party. So, Anyway. Well, here's the biggest category, sports and competition. Okay. And I don't know shit about sports, so I may get a ton of this wrong. Number one, 1964. Mickey Mantle, who I have heard of, got his 2000th hit. His 2000th hit in 1964 on the 17th. And then November of that was October the 17th. And then November of 1964, Jim Brown of the Cleveland Browns, no relation, becomes the first NFL National Football League player to hit 10,000 yards rushing, career rushing. I don't know what that means. I don't know if he was like in a hurry or busy or something. Oh, I get what this means though. Okay, 1981, September of 1981. The longest Major League Baseball game at Fenway Park in history at that time. I don't know if there's been a longer one ever since, but it was 19 innings, this particular game. It was finally called, and we didn't find out till the next day that I think the Seattle Mariners won. It was the Boston Red Sox. I guess Fenway Park is their stadium. Against the Seattle Mariners. Again, I don't know shit about this stuff, so just bear with me. Also 1981, Leroy Irving sets the record for yards gained on punt returns. I think I know what this means. You know, after one team scores, then they have to punt the ball to the opposite team, and then that team has to run the ball as far as they can. So I guess this guy, Leroy Irving, set the record for how far he went collectively or in aggregate after catching a punt. Anyway. Oh, this one I know about. Venus Williams, the famous tennis player. She made her tennis debut at age 14. Halloween, October the 31st of 1995. Now, it's interesting to note that Mars was going through her 11th house at the time, which is sort of like gaining recognition and honors. And, well, I mean, that's 10th house stuff, but, having an audience. That's very 11th house. Getting fans. Also, the Chicago Bulls. See, I know about this one because I like basketball. So the Chicago Bulls, right? They retired Michael Jordan's jersey, number 23. It was a long-ass ceremony, apparently. But, Michael Jordan was one of the greatest basketball players ever, or at least he was when I was young. I used to collect basketball cards. And I remember that was, when I was young is when they went to the Olympics, the Dream Team. And that was a big deal. So, okay, maybe you know this guy, George Foreman, famous boxer and grill manufacturer. He's got a grill with his name on it, right? He knocks out Michael Moore to win the boxing heavyweight championship. And that was November of 1995. So, and then in the year 2000, Tiger Woods becomes the first golfer since some old white guy in 1953 to win 3 back-to-back major championships in a calendar year. And this was right after he won the PGA Tour, August of 2000. So, I mean, that was a big momentous event, sort of a record being set there. Oh, Venus Williams sets her, was it Venus or Serena? Anyway, Venus Williams wins her first title, the U.S. Open, in 2000. So that's pretty open. That was pretty wild. That's her first title. Venus Williams. Then, in the year 2000, also, Sammy Sosa. He became the second player after Mark McGwire to hit 50 home runs in 3 consecutive years. So that was pretty wild. Year 2000. In the year 2000. Oh, Jamaican Olympic sprinter Usain Bolt breaks the world record for the 100-meter sprint, 9.72 seconds, and that was May of 2008. Here's Serena Williams. Sorry. The other two were Venus Williams. But her sister Serena, who happens to have Mars in Leo, defended her US Open title in 2013 against someone named Victoria Azarenka, who I don't know. But anyway, she won. Alex Rodriguez, I know him. His name is also A-Rod, or he goes by A-Rod. And any dude with Rod in his name, I probably know. So, anyway, he set a new Major League Baseball record by hitting 24 Grand Slam home runs. That's a bigger deal than a home run for the New York Yankees. And that was September 20th of 2013. So a Grand Slam, if I remember correctly, it's when you have people on first, second, and third base, and then the hitter who's on deck or who's up to bat hits a home run, and all four of them score, right? Like it was a 4-on-1. Crazy. Anyway, I don't know. I'd be down. But that's a Grand Slam home run. I don't know. You guys can comment in the comments if I'm wrong. So. Oh, and the U.S. Women's soccer team won the FIFA World Cup against the Netherlands, July of 2019. You know, the U.S. women's soccer team has historically been really good. So, well, what are some events that are happening now that we can sort of see bleed into this Mars Leo energy, right? Well, we have a possible debt default in June. I was talking about a government shutdown. This group called the Freedom Caucus, they sure want freedom. They actually want the US to default on its debt, right? Which would basically sacrifice the world economy so that they could have draconian spending cuts that just hurt working people. So, I mean, that's pretty crappy. And it's all about freedom, though. It's freedom. It's all about freedom. Freedom is fantastic. We got to stop all this spending, but we got to spend more on a wall. Anyway, I will stop. I'm not going to get political. But you see, this is everything's political. Everything's spiritual, and everything's political. So, anyway, debt default. But also, I watched a video yesterday of Bernie Sanders and progressive Democrats giving a press conference pushing the Biden administration to invoke what's called the 14th Amendment, right? In the 14th Amendment, it very clearly states that the United States will not default on its debt. Apparently that was put in there following the Civil War so that debt repayments wouldn't be disputed. So now the president could invoke the 14th Amendment, but it's also very controversial. We don't need to get into that right now. Oh, and Volodymyr Zelensky, right, is on sort of a diplomatic world tour right now. In fact, he's supposed to be meeting with Mohammed bin Salman pretty soon. Oh, this is pretty funny. In terms of building projects having to do with Mars, and this is a bit of conflict too, but Disney pulled out of a billion dollar building project that they were going to do in Florida, which actually hurts their economy quite a bit. And they cited Ron DeSantis and a lot of his, wacky laws that Florida is passing as a big reason. Now, in terms of entertainment stuff going on, Andy Rourke, for those of you who like the Smiths, right? I love the Smiths. But Andy Rourke was the bassist, and he just passed away at 59 from cancer. So cancer is sort of a Martian thing, too. It's an illness. Ooh, Martha Stewart. I think she's 81 now. She just appeared on the cover of the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue. So I thought about putting this or filing this under sports stuff, but it's also entertainment. Now, she's also a Scorpio rising like Prince and Vladimir Putin, right? So that means when Mars goes through Leo, it's also touring through her 10th house, right? So sort of interesting that she's all of a sudden on the cover. Now, I mean, it started while Mars was in Cancer, probably, but it is pretty interesting and fitting. Oh, and we do have loads and loads of sporting events happening. So the US PGA Tour just started, right? And it's continuing while Mars is in Leo. starting on my birthday, we're going to have the Table Tennis World Championship. So ping pong, I guess. May 28th is the Indianapolis 500, right? Later in May also is the French Open tennis. And then we have the Asian Cup for soccer. Oh, the Stanley Cup for hockey. I know that one. The NBA Finals. Big, big deal. For golf, the US Open in June. Excuse me, we have the Summer Special Olympics. Oh, excuse me. The Summer Special Olympics. We have the World Lacrosse Championship. We have the Tour de France. We have Wimbledon, the famous, tennis thing in England. And then we have the Women's World Cup for football, soccer, whatever you want to call it. And now I would like to talk a little bit about your horoscopes and see how this stuff sort of impacts you. Because we got a feel of how it's going to impact the country and the world sort of in general. But what about you? What about you? What about Bob? Sorry. Okay. So let's pull up our little thing here, shall we? Let's pull up our little thing here, shall we? So Mars comes to Leo. This is a Cancer. So let's adjust it for Aries Rising. And I want you to be able to see this. So Aries Rising. So that means Mars is passing into your 5th house. What sort of things do we expect when Mars passes into our 5th house? Well, number one, if you have kids, watch out for quarrels with your kids, quarrels with children, right? That does frequently happen as Mars tours the 5th house. The other thing that can happen is you can get very, very horny and you would want to expend your sexual energy. So that can be a thing. And that's another way we make children. So, we can also see disruptions to pregnancies and things like that, but we won't get into those significations so much. There are negative significations with this too. Again, we talked about abortions or terminated pregnancies. That's not necessarily negative unless you didn't want it, right? Unless you didn't want a miscarriage or you did, right? That can be very difficult if you really want your child. So that is probably the most dire signification here. So don't trip out about that. Usually it's just fighting with our kids or, arguing with our kids. Like morning times. They don't want to get up or they don't want to go to school or whatever. So that kind of stuff. Now, let's move on to Taurus Rising. So Mars goes into the 4th house here. Oftentimes, this can be conflicts with landlords, parents, right? Things could go awry with your living situation, not just arguments with landlords, but disputes with a property management company, disputes with maintenance things, or you may have repairs you need to make in your home suddenly. Something breaks, right? Appliances break, that sort of stuff. So just be aware of that. You might need to have some money for a rainy day. Now, we'll talk about other house placements that have to do similar things, but just suffice it to say here, you may see arguments or disputes with a realtor, a landlord, a roommate, something to do with your living situation or your home, or your parents. So, well, let's move on to Gemini Rising. So for our Gemini friends, Mars enters the 3rd house. The 3rd house is your community, your environment, right? It's our commutes, things like that. It's also our siblings and extended family. You'll see people like aunts, uncles, cousins, So when Mars goes into the 3rd house, you could see quarrels or disputes with them, right? That could be siblings. My little brother and I got in some crazy fights a couple of times. You can also see, disputes with your extended family, disputes with friends in your immediate area. Watch out for road rage. Road rage is terrible here. Slow down when you drive. Car accidents can be very prevalent with this transit. So be careful. Be careful. Be very careful with this. You don't want to get in any car accidents. Why does my Trump impression suck so much? It's fantastic. Anyway, so commutes. You want to watch out driving, especially. Okay, be careful. Be careful. You may also see um, um, you see the third house can be our education sometimes. We'll have disruptions to education or disputes with professors or teachers or whatever. Now let's move on to the next. Cancer rising. So this is your second house here. The second house is our money, our finances, our livelihood, our stuff. So when Mars rather goes to our second house, we have a proclivity to overspend. We will maybe be doing retail therapy, maybe we suddenly have a hankering to make a big expense. We need that new PS5, or maybe we need to buy a car suddenly because we got ours stolen. Excuse me, one time my catalytic converter was cut clean out of my car on Thanksgiving. So, pretty wild, huh? Also, well, I mean, the main thing is watching the spending stuff. But if you have a small business, you could see disruptions to your small business. You could see interferences. You could see clients talking crud. You could see cancellations, things like that. People just sort of disrupting the flow of business. Well, now let's go to Leo. Leo Rising, which is Mars in your first house. So when Mars enters your first house, coming out of the 12th, right, where it's very much about isolation and agitated isolation. We enter the first house where suddenly you can get a lot of dynamism and drive. It may make you more reactive, so you want to watch out for that. You don't want to say things that you will regret later. You want to watch out for health stuff too. There may be accidents. When you cook or use knives, like heat or knives, two things ruled by Mars, you want to be careful. Okay, you want to use extra attention, extra focus. Remember when you're cutting with knives, right? You let the knife do the work. You don't press hard and you curl your finger. I was in food service for many years. Anyway, so, well, let's move on here. Just watch out because you're going to be full of energy and vigor, and you might be sort of overzealous when it comes to, your personal stuff. Just watch out getting in arguments. So Virgo rising here. That means Mars is going into the 12th house. So this is where we get the agitated isolation thing a little bit. This is where we don't want people around. We want to be left alone. And if people don't leave us alone, we will be very reactive. This isn't the fun healing sort of isolation. This is leave me the F alone. I'm anxious. I need to withdraw. There's too much going on. I am overwhelmed. So you need to let yourself be overwhelmed, and you just need to be a little bit merciful with yourself here, right? You're going to be low energy and you're going to be high anxiety. So this is time to figure out how to relax and to take your mind off things by doing something fun-ish. Now, what about our Libra rising friends? Well, Mars goes into your 11th house, doesn't he? And this could be quarrels with friends. It can also be fighting with your audience. A good example of that is me. I oftentimes get into arguments with fans or people who follow my content, people who consume my content. Friends too. It can be, disputes with friends. So just, again, watch out that you don't say things that you can't take back. Because, our good friends are very valuable to us, emotionally, physically, mentally. So just watch out. Watch out. Think before you speak and walk away before you get embroiled in an argument. You can say, you know what, bruh, this is getting very heated right now, and I need to pull back. Let's come back and talk about this later. Now, for Scorpio risings, we already mentioned that the 10th house is Leo. Leo's the 10th house, right? So Mars entering the 10th house is oftentimes fighting with your bosses. So those of you with Scorpio Rising, watch out for quarrels with bosses. Now, for those people who are self-employed, we can get some bad rep stuff. People can be talking crud, like I said earlier with the third house. We can also have disruptions when it comes to life direction, or disruptions when it comes to our career or job. Firings, quitting, cutting things off. So you may also see some zeal and drive to go for a promotion or a different job. Now we go to Sag Rising, which puts Mars going through the 11th house, through the 9th house. Now this is really where you don't want to get into arguments, because your political and devotional and philosophical and ideological reactivity will be tip top. You're going to be fighting for what you believe. And if someone disputes what you believe, you'll probably want to get into a debate or an argument. So, and sometimes those are constructive and fine. Other times it just causes problems. So just use your best judgment about when to, be defensive or zealous, and when not to be. You also want to watch out for difficulties at school or university. With Mars going through there, school can be cut off really quickly. We can get academically disqualified or whatever, or, stuff like that. So just be careful. And then for Capricorn Rising, we've got Mars going into the 8th house. So this oftentimes is similar to the second, where we have big expenses, unexpected expenses, that all of a sudden take up a bunch of our money. So again, be aware of that. Do your best to save for a rainy day. Now the 8th house is also death, but that's one of the more dire significances. I wouldn't necessarily say that, death is a big signification here, a guarantee here, but it is part of the meaning. And the other thing too is facing fears, fearful things coming up. But you really want to watch out for accruing debt. Accruing debt, big expenses. And then Mars entering the 7th house for Aquarius Rising. So, and this is me, Aquarius Rising. So Mars going through the 7th house can be disputes with partners. It can be breakups, right? But for those of us who are single, Mars going through the 7th house can also spark some new developments when it comes to dating, to romance, to love, to sex, stuff like that. So this could also be an auspicious time. Venus is going to enter Leo in June. So Venus will be sort of picking up the pieces of what Mars breaks. Let's move ahead now for Pisces Rising. So for Pisces Rising, Mars enters the 6th house where he rejoices. It's sort of like his place. Now, when Mars enters the 6th house, again, we can see injuries. So please take care here. We can also see injuries to pets and animals. So really, really watch out. Take care of your pets. If you have a small dog or cat, watch out for coyotes and animals and things like that. You don't want your animals to become lunch or dinner for someone else. You also want to watch out your own illnesses and things like that, because you could get sick during this transit. So just do your best to keep your immune system up, get enough sleep, rest, nutrition, all that good stuff. You want to take care of your body. You may also get a hair up your butt to start an exercise routine during this thing. So just beware of that. Okay. Well, that was the final one. That was the final horoscope. So, so I want to say, please, 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 like I said, like the video, subscribe to my channel, comment below. These are all important things. It would be fantastic if you did this for me. Okay. The American people are they're good people. But also, I do wonderful readings. All my information is in the description below. And please, please, please follow me on social media, and consider donating to my Patreon. I love you. Thank you for being supportive. And have a wonderful whatever you're having. And transmission.